The job isn't done. So what's next for the Houston Texans in building a competitive roster? Nick Caserio, you're on the clock.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Battle Red Nation, from H-Town to your town. Today's episode and every episode of the Locked On Texans podcast is for Texan fans all around. Got some interesting conversations for you guys today. Could Ty Simpson help out the Houston Texans? What do I mean by that? Stick around, as we know Houston owns, currently at least, the 28th overall pick. Hey, I don't know what it is with Texan fans, but stop being so cheap on the offensive side of the ball, man. And stop being so cheap regarding the tight end spot. Spend some money, whether that be free agency and salary cap or a draft capital in this year's draft. But they got to upgrade. Stop thinking the cheap way out, man. But the job is not close to being done for the Houston Texans, and that's what we're going to start off today's show. Shout out my everydayers from the Himalayas for making the Locked On Texans podcast your first listen of the day, and for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your Texas Credential Media member and football analyst, John Hickman. Now, as we talk about the job not being done, I want to shout out to 713 Sports Caesar for putting this out as a reminder. Free agent signings at offensive line since 2021. 2021 is when Nick Caserio took over. 21 to 22, A.J. Cann, Scott Quessenberry, Justin Britt, who just retired out of nowhere, Justin McCray, Lane Taylor. 2024, George Fant, Michael Dieter. 2025, Trent Brown, Cam Robinson, Lincoln Tomlinson, Ed Ingram. And I think we can probably say 2025 is the best free agent offensive line signings that Nick Caserio has had. Goes 2 for 2 there. Trent Brown, not Lincoln Thompson, but Trent Brown and Ed Ingram, both very instrumental in the win streak, especially when you get Trent Brown back out there on the field, what he did to protect the quarterback, and also Ed Ingram being Houston's best run blocker all year. I want to take us back really quick to a video from Nick Caley when he was asked about what is the Caley's offense.
Well, it depends on the players we got, and that's not a cop-out. That's the reality of it. So it can evolve, be willing to change and do whatever we need to do that's necessary based on who we have and who we're playing. Whether that's, again, you want to get big in terms of multiple personnel or not, gap schemes or zone schemes, committing to more play action or not, that's going to really be dependent on, what your personnel dictates and who you have available. So again, that's the great part about this year is we get to do a lot of different things and really put a lot of guys in different positions to run certain routes, some of them which some of these guys have never done anything, or certain routes that we have, and they might be just exclusively outside receivers that we're working inside and vice versa. So it's a good opportunity just to see what these guys can do.
A little bit of foreshadowing there, and also I look at what he just said, Nick Caley, for the audio listeners, and I kind of related to maybe the thinking process a lot for this year was this was going to be, though it is year 3 of D'Amico Ryans, Will Anderson, and C.J. Stroud, but offensively this was going to be year 1 for everything. Everything was going to get broken down to be rebuilt back up, and I say that simply because like he mentioned how the personnel can impact the offense, and it can evolve depending on what guys can and can't do, and how the personnel can dictate and what's available, who's available. A lot of that back then now sounds like, hey, guys, I got to figure out who's on this roster that I believe can be a part of my roster moving forward. A lot of that sounds like, give me a year to figure this thing out. We still have a quarterback that we believe in, but we don't know if we have the offensive line pieces. We don't know if the pieces that were brought in will actually be valuable as we continue to move forward. And I kind of want to equate that to, we know Houston just traded for David Montgomery. We also know that they just traded away Titus Howard. And when I hear that, I think we can agree on, hey, the method that has been going into the constant rebuilding of the offensive line needs to change, right? We can agree on that. And also from a play style, David Montgomery fits Nick Caley. Remember when Caley said in that press conference, like he wants to be a physical team? That's not that press conference, but another one post game. Well, it was after the game, I think on a Monday or Tuesday, but he said in that press conference he wants to be a physical team that runs the ball downhill and that Houston has to be better finishing. Okay, well, Montgomery helps at least with half of that. And here's why: 501 yards after the contact, 29 forced missed tackles. And I think he gives Houston a good chance to not have a limited running approach. Houston went primarily gap runs last season, aside from Jawar Jordan, who was the running back with the most zone runs in some way. I think it was due to the backs on the roster, right? In some way. But in a major way, and the most majorist of ways, it was due to not having the pieces up front necessary to be a successful offense, in theory, offensive line and tight end bunch, right? And so we look at Caley in that moment of the video I just played, right? And he mentioned it's not a cop-out. The reality of it is what I'm building here takes more than a season. And we can't do a complete overhaul in the season. The first domino to that, right, was moving on from Larry Tunsil. The second domino, in many ways, moving on from Titus Howard. And things would have been a whole lot different if Joe Mixon didn't have that freak foot injury. But that happened. He didn't play last year. And so the physical downhill running approach that the Houston Texans wanted, well, the first half of the year, they had to rely on a Nick Chubb who was battling himself back from being injured, a shell of himself. So let's keep that in mind when discussing, hey, like, what was the difference between a Nick Caley offense and Bobby Slug offense, and why did the offense fail as often as it did last year? Granted, Nick Caley could have been better in some situations, but I also think that just points to, guys, let's take time. We are rebuilding something, and we are building something from scratch. We have to break it down and build it back up again. And again, the offensive line is the major culprit to the inability to be the physical, downhill, run team who wants to control the clock and wants to play off the play action. The offensive line, the five guys up front, that has to change from a physical standpoint, mental standpoint, attitude standpoint. But there are some names I want to give you, Texan fans, a name at least that I want to give you, and you let me know how you feel about it. Tyler Biadasz, viewed as a dependable center with a lot of starting experience over his 6-year career. He's also young enough, 28 years old, young enough to be considered a long-term investment. And we know that Nick Caserio loves those 2 to 3 year deals for players he views as somewhat, I guess we can consider them championship pieces, key pieces, right? So he can be somewhat of a long-term investment. And there's also a few teams that are around the league that would be looking to use his services in 2026. But that's the name at center. Also, again, Connor McGovern is a name out there. K Mays is the name out there. And what really is frustrating, though I really love Montgomery here in Houston, and some people are upset about the 4th round pick. But again, we'll talk about it later in the show. That 4th round pick could end up being anything. It could be another 4th round pick, depending on what happens in the draft, or before the Texans pick at 28, or after they pick it in the 4th round. They could very well trade back up due to some of the assets they've been able to acquire. However, for Caserio, buddy, you're on the clock, right? Like, it was important for me to point out that the style of offense that Nick Caley wants to run, did the Houston Texans address it with getting David Montgomery? Absolutely. But that's one part of that. That's one half of that. The other half, and I mean, you look at 5 guys comparing it to 2 running backs. So the 5 guys, you have to replace all but Ariante Ursery. And that is going to be a challenge for a general manager. Granted, he didn't have Cole Popovich in that room, or Cole Popovich was not the voice, the dominating voice, but that's a challenge for a general manager who's been offensive line finding challenged, like drafted offensive lines. That's been tough for Caserio. That's just the facts. But also, not only offensive line being a part and an extension of what the problems are, but also tight end. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why many Texas fans want to go the cheap route. And not just in free agency. in the draft as well. I'll talk about that and more on today's show. We got Locked On Texans talk. It's going down. It is Wednesday, Texas fans across the nation, and things can be tough for us as Texan fans, as football fans. We are now having to do life without football, but don't worry, I got you covered on Texans coverage every day this week, and as we get to free agency. But this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. March is a time to celebrate women, especially around International Women's Day, and to recognize just how much they carry at work, in relationships, in families, and in all unseen roles they step into every single day. Shout out to Hannah McNair. It is easy to celebrate that strength, but it's just important to make space for their emotional well-being. And honestly, that goes for all of us. So I kind of think about my mom and my sister and my wife, just how much they carry without saying so, right? They carry a lot. And what makes me think, it also makes me think how many of us are doing the same thing. The roles we play, the expectations we carry, the pressure we always don't talk about. Therapy can help with all of that, creating balance, setting healthy boundaries, and supporting our overall well-being. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served worldwide, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, and it works. Fill out a short questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. And if it's not the right fit, you can switch at any time. Your emotional well-being matters. Find support and feel lighter in therapy with therapy. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That is betterhelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Texan fans, free agency is almost here. It kicks off next Wednesday. And just like free agency is here, Locked On Texans and the Locked On Network is going to be here for you as well. Now through March 15th, join the Everyday Club with promo code free agency, all caps, no spaces. Again, now through March 15th. Go ad free and keep this conversation going on Discord. Join the club at lockedontexans.supercast.com. And Texas fans, we're back talking Texans. I got a question, man. Why does everybody want to be so cheap when it comes to tight end? Now, I really do understand that, especially moving on from Titus Howard, you can't get them all, right? You get in free agency, you're not going to get every big name out there. I 100% get it. Only the Philadelphia Eagles do that, and when they do that, sometimes it backfires on them. So you don't want to be in that situation where you go after names, and those names are either way past their prime, don't fit the scheme, or it just doesn't pan out. And I understand that. However, I don't even want to get to free agency, because obviously we look at free agency and we view it as the top priority during free agency should absolutely be 2 veteran offensive linemen. I still think the Houston Texans will create enough cap space for themselves to go after 2 quality offensive linemen and have and have enough left over for a good tight end. I see Charlie Kohler in a lot of free agent conversations for the Houston Texans. I think Jason Broderick was the first one to kick it off. And Charlie Kohler was a guy that I liked coming out of college a couple of years ago. My very first Senior Bowl that I attended in Mobile, Alabama. I had a conversation with him. May still have it somewhere, just in some old archives. But, I mean, what you look for, essentially what you want out of Cade Stover, Charlie Kohler has already kind of perfected that role. Tight end 3 for Baltimore, very good blocker, very physical up front. Doesn't do a lot of catching. That wasn't his role. So with a higher volume of catches and higher volume of opportunity, his numbers on the receiving end would increase. So I like if you talk about Charlie Kohler, I say, well, you know what? I'm not mad at that. Not necessarily too mad at that. But for Texas fans, it feels like when it comes to tight end, it feels like y'all just want to go the cheap route. Y'all act like Julius from Everybody Hates Chris when it comes to tight ends. And I'm serious. And what's even more frustrating, and I got to be honest with you, what's even more frustrating is when I see these mock drafts. And by the way, I think Charlie Kohler would be good for the Houston Texans based on his physical profile and the things that the Texans need from a tight end too, in terms of being able to block up front, right? We talk about the offensive line being a huge problem for the running game last year. And the fact of the matter is, offensive line was a problem. Tight end was also a problem as well. Those two are an extension of one another in many different ways. And the Texans have to find somebody that is reliable. Cade Stover and Brevin Jordan, whoever else they've signed off the street, has been nowhere near reliable. That's a problem. So I don't want to hear, we got Cade Stover coming back. We have Brevin Jordan coming back, and we'll look at their development, and they'll be in the system for another 2 years. I don't want to hear that. At this point in their career, although Brevin Jordan has suffered from injury that has held him back from really ascending, Cade Stover has shown nothing. And that's no disrespect to the young tight end, because I'm not saying his career is over with, but Cade Stover is a 4th-round pick who was a tight end for Ohio State the year after they drafted. Well, during his time with C.J. Stroud, they drafted him a year after they drafted C.J. Stroud, so they thought that the connection would be there, but it hasn't panned out to nothing. Cade Stover has given Houston more zeros than Mo City as of right now. So banking on that for another year is ridiculous. Charlie Kohler, on the other hand, I think Kohler would give Houston what they want out of, in many ways, Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover. That being said, because there is no longer Titus Howard here in Houston, and because you now look at the priority of the offensive line, which is already prominent, maybe being much more of a concern and much more of a fix that needs a solution with veterans, Kohler I'm okay with. But why y'all wait until the 6th round in these mock drafts to take a tight end? What are we doing? Why are the Texan fan base so conditioned to wait late to draft tight ends? Kaheli Warren, I think that was that Bill O'Brien's last pick? That was a part of Bill O'Brien's last go round. So I'm not going to count him. Brevin Jordan was a 5th-round pick. Cade Stover, 4th-round pick. Luke Lachey, 7th-round pick. And then each and every year, like Houston signed Dalton Schultz in free agency. That's a plus for the tight end spot. But then if you look at Houston traditionally, it's been later round picks. Under Nick Caserio, it's been late round picks. And we wonder, why aren't the tight end unit producing like other teams in the NFL? Some of these guys are coming from situations in college where they had a minimal role, where they were not productive in a college level, productive players. Some of these guys are coming, like the Houston Texans have constantly drafted guys that they need a little work, they're a little raw, they're rough around the edges. They have somewhat of a skill set, but can they play tight end at the next level? You got to move these guys around a lot. Like some of the narratives, especially when I look at Cade Stover, who played linebacker a couple of years before switching over to tight end. That is a recipe for failure. Failure. For the Houston Texans, depending on how they go about free agency, the first 3 picks of the NFL draft has to be a tight end. And for Houston, especially, let's consider this. They trade for David Montgomery. The trust is already there with Woody Marks. I think Jawar Jordan has showed Houston enough, unless they go out and get a Mike Washington out of Arkansas, who ran that 4.3 at 6'2". That was crazy, right? I've already advocated for that one. But if they don't do that, Jawar Jordan is there. But again, a Washington and some of those other backs, they'll be available later, so no worry. But for Houston, as of right now at least, they got 1 first-round, 2 second-round picks. Between the first and second-round pick, that would be the highest the Houston Texans, I think, would have ever drafted a tight end. And the thing about tight end is, just like a young offensive guard or a young offensive tackle could help Houston for the now and future, it's the same thing for tight end. So just stop being cheap. Stop it. Spend you some draft capital on a damn good tight end. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. This was just a moment for me to kind of rant because I see it too often where it's just like, yeah, we get this guy in the 5th round. And I'm like, the last 5th round guy didn't work out. The last back half of the 4th round guy didn't work out. The last 6th and 7th round guy didn't work out. But Texan fans are just conditioned to just say, we'll get one later. He'll work out. Coaching staff are getting ready to go. And it's just like these guys are not wowing you. These guys are not blowing your socks off. What did the tape say in college? Yeah, but Texan fans want to wait and wait and wait. Let's just try something different. Like the same way we're saying Nick Caserio, try something different with offensive line. Houston Texans, do something different with the tight end spot, please. I understand Dalton Schultz is there, and Dalton Schultz had a phenomenal season last year in many different ways, bounced back from the year prior, where a lot of us was calling for his trading or to be released. He bounced back in a major way. But Dalton Schultz got a year older, banged up, fought through adversity and injury. Hey, it'd be nice if the Houston Texans got themselves a tight end with some juice. It would be nice if the Houston Texans got themselves a tight end that's a playmaker, both in the passing game, in the run game as well. And they're available. You just don't want to wait around to the 4th round pick, 5th round pick. You don't want to wait. You don't want to do that no more. We've seen that story. We've watched that movie. And at the end of that movie, we all walk out saying, I could have saved my damn money. Now, could Ty Simpson help the Houston Texans this year? We got more Locked On Texans talk on the way.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
Welcome back, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. We're going to close out today's show with Ty Simpson slipping in this year's draft could really help out the Houston Texans. Oh, yeah. We're starting to hear more and more rumors that a team could trade back up in the 1st round, pick 28, if Ty Simpson is available to draft a young quarterback. And I immediately think about maybe the Jets. And I think for the Jets, they have 2 second-round picks, but they also picked twice in the 1st round. Obviously, it feels like what makes more sense to overdraft Ty Simpson at 16 or get you a bona fide player with those first 2 picks and then trade back up into the 1st round on the back half of that 1st round. Yeah, you'll give up some picks in the later draft, later in the 2026 draft, but you're looking at a quarterback that you can get on the 5th-year option along with 2 playmakers on either side of the ball as cornerstones for whatever the Jets are trying to rebuild. And so they have to think about that. You also look at, like when we look at last year's compensation, if Houston were to flirt with trading back again, if a team calls for a Ty Simpson, what would that look like? A second and a fourth for the following year. So you're looking at a second round pick this year and maybe a fourth round pick for next year. And then, Houston will be sitting at 2 fourth-round picks. You also got teams like the Arizona Cardinals who may call Houston and say, hey, man, we did y'all a solid a couple of years ago, and it worked out in many different ways. Y'all got Will Anderson. Can you do us a solid now? They are in need of a quarterback. Also, in many ways, like I wouldn't rule out two teams, the Rams calling Houston. It may be Minnesota calling Houston. Simply because those like the Rams, they have Matthew Stafford, but it feels like it's just inevitable before we get that notification. Matthew Stafford has announced his retirement. Minnesota, you have JJ McCarthy, but he was the last general manager's pick. How will this new general manager feel about JJ McCarthy? And what's the timetable on McCarthy being having a shot to be a player, right? To be in a quarterback, at least for the Minnesota Vikings. I have said this. I've talked about my friends with this a lot, and then when I hear it on NFL channels like NFL Live or NFL Network, I feel kind of validated. But I thought Ty Simpson, for the most part of last season in college football, I thought he put some better tape out there than Fernando Mendoza. I thought Mendoza really benefited from top to bottom, both sides of the ball. I thought he benefited from a really, really, really good team, as to where I look at Alabama, and for the first time in my life, I ask myself, who's the running back? Who's the running back? Okay, Ryan Williams completely fell off, and now Ty Simpson's number 2 receiver coming into the season is now his number 1 receiver. And so, like, Ty Simpson did some great things in college last year that I think in many ways is worth a fifth-year option for a young quarterback. And that worked out for Houston last year. I mean, the New York Giants called up and they wanted to go get Jackson Dart. Boom. The Houston Texans made the move. That can happen again this year. This is why I say Ty Simpson could help Houston out if they make that move and make a trade. Simply because we know they moved on from one of their 4th-round picks this year. So they'd add another 2nd-round pick. Houston would have 3 2nd-round picks. At that point, you're looking at a team that could really do a lot of damage and address many needs in the 2nd round, where there's going to be some top talent available at guard, at tackle, and at tight end, right? And so keep that in mind. And also maybe if a team like the New York Jets is desperate, and I'm looking right now, the Jets have 3 5th-round picks this year, I believe. Maybe they can throw in one of those 5th-round picks, and Houston can package the 3 5th-round picks. In that case, because they have 2 already, package all 3 together to move up into the 4th round to go get a player that they believe is worth trading up for, similar to what they did in years past. So I would, if I'm Texas fans, I would really hope that Ty Simpson slips past 16. That's where the Jets pick now. That's their 2nd pick in this year's draft. I don't see a team picking him, and I could be wrong, obviously, but I don't see a team picking Ty Simpson after passing the New York Jets at 16 until it feels like they want to trade back up into the back end of that draft to go get him. And Houston would be in a perfect draft pick, perfect draft selection to make that trade go through. And that will give Houston a ton of flexibility. Because if you get 2/3, obviously Houston would pick at their first, 2nd round pick. I mean, if you get 3 seconds, Houston would pick it with their first, 2nd round pick, and then they could package those other 2 to move up and do something else to get the best player available. Or they could just stay with 2 or 3 2nd-round picks and get really busy. So the flexibility there would be, I think, phenomenal. That's how Nick Caserio has operated. If there's any draft to do that with, I think it is a 2026 draft. So we'll see. But thank you for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast, and follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Until next time, ladies and gents, Texas fans across the nation, peace.